Hi, and welcome to the next of our webinars. Today we'll be giving a bit of an update on COVID-19 government support packages, what's available for businesses, and also we'll be running through some of the regulations that businesses need to adhere to going forward at the moment. I'm just going to start off by introducing Claire Hill, who will be taking part of today's session. So Claire will be taking you through the first part of today's session and we'll be talking through the support packages from a HR point of view. Claire established a small business HR consultancy business after working in HR for a number of years. And so we'll be able to discuss all the aspects of the support programs that are available at the moment. I'll be taking you through the second half of today's session. We'll be talking more about the rules and regulations for businesses and what they need to adhere to at the moment with what is quite a complex set of rules and ever-changing set of rules as we're seeing at the moment. We do encourage questions as much as we can, and you should see on your dashboard a little section with questions on there. Please do put those in. And we'll try our best to answer those going forward. I suggest at this point you put your questions in as and when they come to you, and then that gives us a chance to have a look at them because there is a slight delay in them coming through to us. We have got time in the session today to answer any of those questions. Just like to finally say that this is a funded programme through the Humber Business Growth Hub as part of the Grow My SME programme. We have a number of different workshops covering lots of different aspects of business available. So please do go and have a look on the website. Do contact the Growth Hub to see what is available going forward and get yourselves booked on to those coming up. So without further ado, I will pass you on to Claire, who will take you through the first part of today's workshop.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning to everybody. As Peter explained, my name is Claire Hill. I run a business called Hill HR Consultancy, and what I do day to day is support small businesses. So small businesses who typically don't have HR in the business, and we go in and support and help them run the business from an employment and HR point of view. So as you can imagine, for me, for my team, the last 8 months has been almost entirely about supporting businesses through this pandemic, through the furlough scheme and lots of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today. So hopefully what I will speak about comes as first-hand experience, and I can relate to a lot of what the businesses, mainly small businesses, are going through at the moment. And before I start on the first slide, I think it's absolutely essential to say that we are obviously going through an unprecedented time now in terms of employment and HR, and we're supporting small businesses through some of the trickiest experiences of probably of their life at the moment, and some very emotional times, emotional decisions that I have to make, and it's decisions that some of my clients, some small business owners and generally business owners, thought that they probably would not have to make. So it's a massive disruption, a massive emotional upheaval, and what I suppose businesses like myself are here to do is try and support businesses to get through to the other side, and even if possible to get through with a business that in some ways is more robust and more ready to take on the challenges of what we're going to face going forwards. The economic context, as we all know at the moment, is that the furlough scheme, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, has been exceptionally well utilised. It's 9.6 million jobs have been furloughed since April in this country. A lot of those obviously have been through firms such as hospitality and accommodation, which were almost forced to close overnight in April. And that includes also businesses like, I've got clients that are in the beauty industry as well, and they were almost forced to close. A lot of those now have started to reopen, but obviously in some some of the higher tier areas of the country, we're going to see possibly that happening again. We're looking at a UK that could peak at 10% of unemployment, so that's as high as it's ever been. 1.16 million employees are going to be potentially facing unemployment, and 156,000 people have so far been made redundant up to July. And I think that's only going to be the start of what we're going to see. I think the furlough scheme has saved a lot of jobs, hopefully will save a lot of jobs. And as we go on to the other schemes that are available, hopefully they will save some jobs, but not all jobs are going to be saved. And there's no doubt about that. The harsh reality of this is there's going to be possibly a lot more jobs that are going to go because of it. In terms of the redundancies, I mean, that's the sharpest rise we've seen since 2009. So that is just incredible at the moment. Some of the other impacts as well that we're seeing is, you know, the impact on people's jobs, people losing jobs, just their lives, the impact of losing their jobs on their lives. We're seeing an increase in mental health issues amongst workers and employees. And as I said before, the employer having to make some of the most difficult decisions that they've had to make. Many of my clients are family businesses, and many of you watching this may be family businesses. And it's incredibly difficult for family businesses because they treat their employees like their family. And they've having to make some really difficult decisions about potentially ending the employment of what they consider to be members of their family. So, you know, the impact, apart from financial impacts, is we're seeing the other impacts as well on businesses. So what we're going to look at, what I'm going to cover for you today, is we're going to have a quick, and this is going to be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but we're going to look at the existing job retention scheme and the flexible furlough scheme. We're then going to move on and look at the job support scheme and the expansion to the job support scheme. We're going to have a look at the job retention bonus, the statutory sick pay rebate scheme. We're going to look at the kickstart scheme. And then if we've got time, we're going to have a look at some alternatives to redundancy, because this is about really trying to help you preserve jobs. So rather than talk to you about how to make redundancies, I thought it might be better just to have a look at some of the alternatives to redundancy to see how many jobs, you know, we can look at to preserve. We're also going to look at, again, if we've got time, some short time working, layoffs, because again, they are part of trying to keep people in jobs. And then we're going to finish off looking at some flexible and home working as well. That's become a big part of the way we work now, I suppose. So let's start just by looking at the job retention scheme. So that is what we also call the furlough scheme, which is probably easier to say. And for those of you who've been using it, then you'll know that this scheme comes to an end on the 31st of October. The last date that you can claim will be the 30th of November. So that's quite important. So any claims that you haven't yet made, or claims that you need to make during October, then you have up until the 30th of November to make those claims. And past 30th of November, you won't have a chance. So it's important that that's going to be your cutoff date. And currently, the employer contribution is sitting at 60%, including the on costs as well. So NI and tax, with your employee still receiving 80% of their pay. So it's quite likely that you may still have staff sitting on the full furlough scheme off completely and still receiving 80% of their pay. Running alongside the full furlough scheme, we've also got what we've called the flexible furlough scheme. And that's where you've been allowed to have staff who have been part working and part furlough. So some hours they will come in and they'll get paid for what they work, and for what they don't work or for the hours that you can't utilise, they have been furloughed. And again, as in line with the furlough scheme, that comes to an end on the 31st of October, and you'll have until the 30th of November to make claims for that. So once the the furlough scheme comes to an end on the 31st of October, it's going to be replaced with what's called the job support scheme. It's not a comparable scheme, and it doesn't try to be. The whole point of the job support scheme is that employers have been using the furlough scheme to try and get employees back into the workplace. So this scheme the intention of this scheme is to try and keep those people in the workplace in their viable jobs, and I'll come on to what that means in a bit. So it's all about protecting jobs and keeping those jobs. So it's not really supposed to replace the furlough scheme. There's two schemes, and I'm going to refer to them as Scheme 1 and Scheme 2. And they both start on the excuse me, and they both start on the 1st of November. So as soon as the furlough scheme ends, the job support schemes will be put into place. And both schemes will run for 6 months. So from the 1st of November until the end of April 2021. And you will, as the employer, you will be able to claim from December. You'll be paid in arrears on a monthly basis. Now, this scheme is going to be open to all businesses who have, in the UK, who have a UK bank account and also a UK PAYE scheme as well. Now, it does say that the scheme will be open to all SMEs and some large businesses. SMEs, using the definition of what an SME is, it would be a business that is up to 250 employees or up to a turnover of £25 million. So for large businesses, if they want to if you want to use the scheme, then apparently there is going to be some questions or something they're going to have to answer to demonstrate that they need to use the scheme. So they have been impacted by the coronavirus and they need to use the scheme. Businesses will be able to use this scheme even if they didn't previously use the furlough scheme. So it will be open to business even if you didn't apply or if you didn't use the furlough scheme at all. And you will be able to use this scheme and the job retention bonus, which I'll come on to in a bit. You will be able to apply for both. So under this scheme, employers will continue to pay for the hours that their employees worked, and employees must work for at least 1/3 or 33% of their usual hours. As far as we know, they can't work for less than that. So that's going to be absolute cut-off. You're going to have to provide your staff with work at least for 1/3 or 33% of their hours. As the employer, you will then pay your employees for that time in the usual way. So whatever their hourly rate is, you will pay them as per usual. Then whatever hours are not worked, you as the employer and the government will contribute to 1/3 of those hours each, again at their usual pay. The government's contribution will be capped at £697.92 per month. So there's no doubt really that those on the higher wages, and I think it works out to around about 45k a year, will not see their full wages or at least 77% of their wages because of the cap. Employers will need to continue paying NI and pension contributions as normal. And the employee should receive, because they're going to have to take 1/3, they're going to forego 1/3 of their wages as well. So, but they should be paid at least 77% of their pay as well, depending on how many hours you ask them to work. As I said before, you'll pay the NI and contributions. They talked about viable jobs, and there isn't really a legal definition or a definition that's been given for what's a viable job. But what they're talking about And what the Chancellor talks about is that it's a job which, you know, is needed in the business. It's either their job that they already hold, or it's a job which can be that the business needs going forward. So it's not a made-up job, or a job that doesn't help the business or provide some support to the business in any way. So it's going to be a job that actually exists in the business. You can go in and out of different working patterns. So you might decide that you want to bring your staff back on a working pattern on 1 week, but you want to increase that for the next one. As long as a working pattern exists for 7 days, then you can then move to different working patterns if you want to. So that's absolutely fine. You cannot in the, sorry, I'm just going to go back before I confuse you with the second scheme. You cannot in the scheme give your employees, they can't be under notice of redundancy, or you can't make them redundant within the claim period. If you feel you do need to make redundancies within the claim period, so within up to the end of April, you would then have to remove staff from the scheme in order to go through a redundancy exercise. But you can't do it whilst they are actually on the scheme. Now, we are waiting for further guidance on the scheme, and there are some unanswered questions that we don't yet know. A couple of those being, what happens to annual leave whilst somebody's on the scheme? Does the annual leave go into the 33% that they are working, or does the annual leave go to the other part of when they're the kind of 66%, I suppose, that they're not working? So I'm waiting for guidance on that. We're also waiting for guidance on how we are to treat employees that have variable hours or different hours. They're paid different wages and different hours each month and week. We think probably, and this is only again a guess, we think that possibly it'll be treated the same as the furlough scheme, where you will apply the pay to the previous month or the previous month of the year before, but we're yet to have that confirmation from the government. I thought it might be useful just to answer some questions that I've been getting from clients, some frequently asked questions, and they might be useful for you at that stage. So here's few questions that I've been getting asked. How do employers claim for the payment? And the answer is the government will pay their 1/3 direct to the employer, but they will pay it in arrears. You'll be able to claim for that online, but it does mean that you will have to pay your staff up front before you're able to claim it back. So that's just something that you'll just need to bear in mind from when you're budgeting or doing your budgeting, that you'll need to think that you're going to have to pay them up front. So what happens if there is not enough work for the employee? Well, this is all about protecting viable jobs, as I said before, jobs that actually exist in the organisation. And if you can't provide your employees with 1/3 of that job, then I suppose really it's not a viable job in your organisation. And that's going to be a grim situation and a really grim question that many employers are going to have to ask. Because if you have jobs that at the moment and you can't see the end of it, that you don't see how you're going to keep that job going, even with the job support scheme, you still can't give somebody 33% of their hours, then the question is going to have to be, unfortunately, is this a viable job in your business? And actually, is there going to have to be another decision which is going to be made? Inevitably, that's going to look like probably a redundancy. So if you can't provide the job, 1/3 of the job, then you're going to have to ask whether it's actually a viable job going forward. Another question I've been asked, which is interesting, is actually, is redundancy a better option than using the job support scheme? And unfortunately, in many situations, or in some situations, the answer is probably going to be yes, that redundancy is going to be a better option. It's not something I enjoy saying, because this is very much about trying to preserve jobs and keep people in employment. But on the other side of it, there are some businesses that are in really dire situations at the moment, dire financial situations. For staff that have less than 2 years service, obviously the option of making them redundant is going to be a lot easier. I'm not saying that you should treat everybody that's got under 2 years service just by making them redundant, because obviously, although they don't have unfair dismissal rights until they've got 2 years, they do have other rights such as discrimination. So please really consider it carefully before you do decide to make anybody redundant. But certainly staff with less than 2 years, it's much lower risk. And for staff that have got more than 2 years, you know, again, as I said before, if you can't find those hours to give to staff, even using the job support scheme, then potentially you're going to have to look at whether redundancy is going to be the only option, really. What if staff cannot work? Well, if staff can't work, then they're not eligible for the job support scheme. So two situations could be if staff are off sick. Well, if they're off sick, they can't carry out their 1/3 or their 33% of their hours, therefore they're not eligible for the job support scheme. If they're on any type of family leave, such as maternity, paternity, adoption, then again, they can't work their 33% of their hours, therefore they're not eligible for the job support scheme. They will receive their statutory payments that they're entitled to, but unfortunately not job support scheme. As soon as they return to work, of course, following their family leave, they will, you can of course then put them onto the job support scheme and use it for them then. Can employers force employees to work in this way? Well, using the job support scheme will be a variation to their contract, as the furlough scheme was, because you are in effect changing their pay and changing their hours of work. And so it is advisable to seek consent from the staff, from your staff, and use an agreement. There was some, right at the beginning of furlough scheme, there was some confusion over whether that agreement should be in writing or not. And I don't think that was ever properly resolved. However, my advice would be to get any agreement that you have with your staff in writing. One of the things that HMRC is saying is that, apart from it being best practice, is that HMRC may ask to see the agreement that you have with your staff. And if the agreement is only a verbal agreement, then it's going to be obviously very difficult to send that to HMRC for any proof. So my advice would be to get any agreements that you have with your staff in writing with them, so it's absolutely clear what they are getting, they're consenting then to being on the support scheme. What about staff who are on fixed term contracts or part-time staff? All staff are covered by this scheme, so regardless of what contracts they're on, they will be covered by the scheme. And if your staff are part-time, then obviously it'll be 33% of their part-time hours. What about employees who have transferred into your business? So there we're talking about TUPE transferring in, so anybody that's transferred from another business to yours. So if they are on the payroll of the previous business on or before the 23rd of September, then they can transfer onto the scheme as you as the incoming employer. Annual leave is unfortunately quite a big question that I get asked quite a lot, and unfortunately I can't answer that at the moment because we haven't had the guidance from the government as to how that is going to work. It's likely that they're not going to be able to take annual leave, but we don't know the answer to that yet. So as soon as that comes out, hopefully there'll be lots of guidance put out about that. So those are a few of the frequently asked questions that I get from my clients. So hopefully they're useful to you. Excuse me. And I'm going to move on now to what we call Scheme 2, which is the expansion scheme. And this is used or has been put into place for businesses that have been legally required to close as a direct result of COVID. So that could be businesses that are in tier 3 who have been told they have to close, or it could also involve businesses that have had an outbreak of coronavirus and have been forced to close by Public Health England as well, or some other government body. So it could be one of those two situations. It doesn't cover, however, businesses that have chosen to close because of the situation. It doesn't cover that. So it's only where they've been legally required to close by either the government, Public Health England, or another government body. In this situation, sorry, my cat just climbed up. In this situation, the government is going to pay 2/3 of the employee's salary, or up to 67%. And that again, it will be capped up to £2,100 a month. And that is really to protect the jobs of the businesses that have to close. Employers won't be asked to cover any of the employment costs except for having to cover national insurance contributions and pension contributions. However, it's estimated that probably half of the potential claims won't incur national insurance or pension contributions, and therefore the employer won't have any costs. But that's certainly, there won't be any other costs for the employer to claim. And that will, it'll be eligible for businesses whilst the restrictions are in place. So once those restrictions of having to legally required to close are in place, and where employees cannot work for a minimum of 7 consecutive days. So that's scheme 2. Okay, so moving on to, and I'm sorry I was going through this quite quickly, but quite a lot to cover, so I wanted to make sure I got everything in. So the next government support, financial government support that they put into place for businesses, it's what's called the job retention bonus. Now this is going to be a one-off payment to employers of £1,000. It's a payment that's for the employer. It doesn't have to be passed on to the employee. And it is a bonus for the employer who has retained furloughed staff until the 31st of January 2021. So where you've had staff that you've kept on, continuously employed, you've had them furloughed, even if they were previously furloughed and they've since come back, then it'll be a bonus that you will be able to pay. So you need to have continuously employed them between the 1st of November 2020 and the 31st of January 2021. They mustn't be serving notice, and that's notice of redundancy, notice of retirement, or dismissal. They mustn't be serving notice, and they must have been paid at least £1,560 during the 3 tax months, and the 3 tax months being between November to January. So roughly that is going to be a minimum of £520 each month that they must be paid. The tax years obviously will be from the 6th to the 5th, so 6th of November to the 5th of December, 6th of December to the 5th of January, and 6th of January to the 5th of February. So those are going to be the 3 tax months that you're going to have to show that you've paid them a minimum of £520. And the reason they've done this is to prevent employers from claiming the bonus for employees that have been kept on the books but not actually are used, such as 0 hours contract workers would be an example. So you've kept them on your books, but you haven't actually paid them through those 3 months. So that'll mean that you can't claim for them. You've actually got to have been on your books and actually have paid them for those 3 months. If you are a company who have been required or have paid back the furlough grant for whatever reason, you won't be able to claim. So this is only for businesses that have claimed a furlough grant and have not paid it back for whatever reason, or been required to pay it back for whatever reason. If you go onto the government website, they have come up with some quite good working examples for you of where you can and can't claim. And it's worth just going onto that as well. If you look at the gov.uk and go onto the job retention bonus guidance, you'll see that they've actually given you some examples. You will be able to claim the bonus between the 15th of February and the 31st of March 2021. So that'll be the time when you can claim for each of your employees. And as I said before, you don't have to pass that on to your employees at all. That this is money for the employer. If you've had employees who have been off sick during that period, you will still be able to claim for them because it relates to taxable earnings. And obviously statutory sick pay is taxable earnings. So you will be able to claim for anybody who's been off sick during that time. So that's the job retention bonus. So moving on then to the statutory sick pay rebate scheme. And this is, again, a temporary scheme that was put into place to help relieve the financial burden on small businesses of absences due to COVID. Not necessarily absences with employees who actually have COVID, but any absences that are COVID related. And that did include shielding as well. And I'll go on to a list in a minute of those that it does include and who you'll be able to claim back SSP for. It is paid from the first qualifying day, so whatever the qualifying day is for your member of staff, after the 13th of March 2020. So anybody that goes off sick after that date, COVID related, you have been able to claim back the statutory sick pay, and it covers, and you can claim back the first 2 weeks for each employee. From the 28th of March, they expanded the scheme to also include those who have come into contact with somebody else. And they did further expand it, and I'm going to go into that in a moment. And you should keep records for 3 years of everybody that you have used under the rebate scheme, because it's likely, obviously, the HMRC may be asked to see your records. So who can you claim for? Well, you can claim for anybody that has coronavirus or have the symptoms of coronavirus. So symptoms obviously being the high temperature, the new continuous cough, or the loss or the change to your sense of smell or taste. So any of your employees that have those symptoms or have coronavirus, have tested positive for coronavirus, obviously you can claim for. You can also claim, excuse me, for anybody who they live with, excuse me, who they live with, who either has tested positive for coronavirus or has symptoms of testing positive, symptoms of coronavirus. So you can claim for the SSP for them, and for anybody who's had to self-isolate because of that. You can also claim for anybody who within their support bubble has tested positive or has symptoms as well. You can also claim for anybody that's been told to self-isolate either via the NHS Test and Trace or the COVID app, the NHS app as well. So anybody that's been told they've come into contact and they need to self-isolate, you can claim for them as well. And also anybody who's been told that they need to go into hospital for an operation as well and need to self-isolate before that, you can claim. There's a debate at the moment as to whether you can claim for those who have been away on travel overseas for countries that aren't on the corridor and that have come back and have to self-isolate for 14 days. At the moment, there's a discussion about whether they should be eligible or not. Beforehand, before they go, they are very clear And I'm not talking about where travel advice has changed whilst they've been on holiday, but certainly before they go, where they have understood that they are going to a country where they should isolate when they get back. They have to isolate, sorry, when they come back. And they understand that before they go. And they've put themselves, it's their choice, and they've put themselves in a situation where they can't work when they get back. And this really covers those that can't work from home, because if they can work from home and they're well, of course, they can continue to do that. And there's been no change. But where they can't work from home and they've put themselves in a position where they can't come into the workplace, and that's where their work is, in the workplace, then the argument is really that they've made that choice themselves, and therefore they're not eligible for statutory sick pay. You may wish to be more sympathetic with workers who have gone on holiday, and whilst they're away, the travel advice has changed, and the country that they have gone to, and this happened a lot with people, I think, that went to Spain earlier on, where they went, and whilst they were away, the country was suddenly, they changed the travel restrictions. You may want to be a bit more sympathetic there and agree that actually you will claim for them. But certainly the advice at the moment is that where they've made the choice and they're not eligible for SSP. So that's the SSP rebate scheme, statutory sick pay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on. So those are all the grants that are available for from the government to support businesses. What we're going to do now is move on to the Kickstart programme, because this is, although it's not a grant that the government are giving to employees, it is a fund which has been set up, which the government, it's a £2 billion fund, which the government have set up to support people getting into work and support those employers that are looking for workers. So although it's not a direct grant, it is indirectly something, the way that the government is supporting. So this scheme is designed to create job placements for young people who are currently on universal credit and who are at the risk of being unemployed for a long time. You create 6-month job placements, and it's a little bit like a try before you buy scheme, I suppose. Is that you can have a young person in the workplace, you can see how they work, you can see the type of person they are, and if they fit into your company, into your business, and they're really good, and you can see real potential, then actually you could continue to either employ them or put them on an apprentice scheme, which I'll come on to in a bit. So it's a great way of getting to know the young person and seeing if they're right for your business. And for the young person, the benefit is that they may have a job at the end of it, if all goes well, so that'd be great. But it also gives them experience of working in a real workplace, rather than classroom learning, where they're just sitting in a classroom behind a desk learning about work, where here they're actually going to be in the workplace, actually doing work and getting involved. So it's great for them. The wages will be paid up for the 6-month placements, up for 25 hours per week at the national minimum wage. There's nothing to stop employers from increasing that if they want to, but they would have to obviously increase that themselves. The only pay that they would get back from the government would be at the national minimum wage. Employers do need to have a minimum of 30 vacancies in order to bid themselves. And when I use the word bid, I'm talking about applying through for placements to the Department of Work and Pensions. That doesn't mean, however, if you only want 1 or 2, that doesn't mean you still can't take advantage of the scheme. It just means that you will have to find yourself what's called an intermediary. And an intermediary can bid on your behalf and can do some of that work for you. And there's quite a few businesses, setting themselves up as intermediaries. You'll see quite a few private businesses. There's also businesses such as colleges, universities, but there's also the Chamber of Commerce, whichever chamber you're in, they're actually setting themselves up as well. And as far as I know, you don't have to be a member, that you can use them as an intermediary. So what the intermediary will do is, if you don't want 30 placements, which many small businesses don't, then they will actually make that bid on your behalf. So you will need to go and find yourself somebody to do that for you. They will receive a grant of £300 to do some of the admin for you. And the admin can involve putting the bidding for you, putting the application in on your behalf. And some intermediaries might even go a bit further, and that might include screening applicants for you, shortlisting them, carrying out telephone interviews. So I think that's going to be different depending on what each intermediary is going to do. So when you're looking around for intermediaries, you might want to ask that question: is, what you're going to do for us, how much you're going to help. And the funding for the young person doesn't go direct to you. It actually goes to the intermediary in the first place, and the intermediary will pass that on to you. So again, just bear that in mind when you're actually having to think about funding the person that you're actually going to have to pay in the first place before you'll get the money back. Some of the things just to think about when you're choosing your intermediary is, again, as I said, just ask them what they're going to do for you. I suspect some will do very little. They may just receive the applications in and pass them directly on to you, and you will have to then do all the shortlisting and the screening and maybe the interviewing. And some might actually do some of that for you. They might help you. So I think it's worth just asking that question. Also, because they are taking the funding first before they pass it on to you, it's just worth checking exactly how financially viable they are, to make sure that you're actually going to see the funding passed on to you. And also it's worth asking them how long it's going to take them, what's their payment terms for passing that money on to you as well. Is it going to come in from the government and you'll get it straight away, or is there going to be a delay of so many days before they pass it on to you? So that's just worth asking the question. So what's the process for the Kickstart programme? Well, you will submit your bid, probably through your intermediary, and in that bid you need to just give as much information as you can about what it is the person's going to do. So it'll be an online application, quite possibly, and put in there exactly what you want them to do, how you're going to support them, what the young person's going to get out of the scheme. So as much as information you can about what you will give them and how you will support them and help them. That'll obviously be submitted to the government by your intermediary. And once your bid is approved, the Department of Work and Pensions will then send through to your intermediary a selection of candidates that may be suitable for you. And as I said, either your intermediary will just pass those on to you and you'll do everything else, or they might help you screen on your behalf or support you with that. And then obviously it'll be down to you to select who you want as your successful young person to come and work with you in the placement. The DWP will also allocate you with a work coach, and that work coach will be there to support you and the young person during the placement. There is also some additional funding of £1,500 per the young person, and that funds some of the other costs which might be in connection with having the young person in the business. For instance, that could be equipment that is needed for the young person, training that the young person may need, or a uniform. It might go towards a uniform that you might ask that young person to wear. So it'll all go towards that. Again, it's not clear at the moment from the guidance whether that £1,500 goes straight to your intermediary or gets sent to you. So we're just waiting for that to become clear. And the Kickstart scheme is not an apprenticeship scheme. That's different. But there's no reason why you can't put the young person onto an apprenticeship scheme either at the end of the Kickstart programme, once they've done their 6 months, and then you transfer them onto an apprenticeship scheme to continue with their education, their workplace education, or during the placement. So you take them off the placement and then put them onto the apprentice scheme. So there's no reason why you can't do that if you find that the young person is really settling in well and you really want to keep them as part of your company going forwards. So that's the Kickstart program. Peter, can you hear me? And have I got time to go through some other things that?
Yes.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah,
okay?
no problem. We have got a couple of questions come in.
Okay.
Which I'll probably just go through now if that's okay with yourself.
Yeah, that's fine.
Back on.
Yeah.
So it's only a couple of questions coming so far. Is I think relating to the job support schemes, can the employer make up the employees 30% that they're having to lose? So make it up to their full pay.
Yeah. The answer I'm going to say is no. That hasn't properly been given. The guidance hasn't properly been given. However, in the fact sheet that the government have put out, it does say that there is not an option for the employer to top up. So yeah, so there won't be any top up of it. So it's very clear that it's you pay for the hours they work, you then pay for a third of the unworked hours, the government pays for the third, and the employee has to forego the other third, and there isn't an option for top up.
Okay. The other question, again relating to the support scheme, is like furlough, can this be rolling across employees? So I'm guessing this is to do with the fact that the furlough scheme, you could unfurlough and refurlough employees.
Yeah.
Roll things along.
Yes, yeah, you can. You can go in and out of the scheme. Yes, you can go in and out of the scheme as you need it. You can also go in, use different working patterns as well within the scheme. Yeah.
Brilliant. Those are the only two questions, but yeah, certainly got time for you to carry on through the other schemes as well.
Okay, so these aren't actually government schemes, so not necessarily under what we've been talking about, which is kind of the government support, but it does all go towards how can we try and preserve and protect jobs. So I thought with the time that we've got left, I thought it might just be useful to talk about some of the alternatives that employers can look at to redundancy. Because quite often, even with the job support scheme that's going to be in place, there's going to be, employers are going to be left with questions on, you know, I've got no choice, but I've got to make redundancies. It's really awful, but that's what I've got to do. Well, before you do that, let's just go through a list of some of the other things that could be considered, and see if, you know, if we can protect as many jobs as possible, I suppose, in the country, which would be great. So the obvious thing is that when people leave, don't replace them. That's an obvious one, and I'm sure many people have been doing that anyway. So natural wastage. Stop all recruitment. So anybody that's, unless it's an absolute essential hire that you can't do without, you can't retrain anybody else, and I'll come on to that, or there's nothing else you can do, then freeze all recruitments. You can withdraw job offers that have already been made. That's not, I'm not saying that as a blanket piece of advice, because you do need to look at the job offer, when it was made and how it was made, but it certainly is a possibility that you may be able to, depending on what stage it's at, you may be able to withdraw job offers already made. You can put pay freezes in place and make reductions in pay. Reductions in pay, again, you would have to consult with the staff and tell them what you want to do. Say that, you know, in order to try and preserve jobs, you're going to have to do this, and seek their consent to do this, either on a temporary basis or on a permanent basis. So again, do it cautiously, but it is a possibility. Salary deferrals, again, this is where you ask your staff to defer some of the pay, some of their pay for a period of time, and give it to them back at a later date. Again, that shouldn't be done without discussing it with employees and getting their consent, but it is a possibility that can be done. Reducing working hours, again, with consent, discuss it with employees and see if they will agree to it. It's amazing, you know, you think that there's no way staff will agree to some of these things, and in normal days when we're not, you know, in this unprecedented time, absolutely no way would staff agree to some of these things. But you know, at these difficult times when this isn't the fault of anybody, nobody's done anything wrong, everybody's in the same boat, then certainly you'd be surprised, and I've been surprised by my clients' employees, how many have actually said absolutely yes. If it means I'm going to keep my job and it means I'll have a job to come back to, then yes, we will agree to some of the, you know, to things they probably never would have agreed to. So it's worth not discussing things, you know, really think about things and discuss them with your staff. Layoff and short-time working, I'm going to come to that in a bit, so I'll just skip over that because I'm going to come back to that with another slide. Obviously stopping or reducing all overtime, except for maybe the absolute essential overtime that you've got no choice, you have to do. You can, rather than imposing redundancies, you can ask for volunteers. Now, it doesn't always mean you'll get the right volunteer. So where you put the notice out to say we'd like to invite volunteers, be very clear in that even if you get volunteers, it's completely at the employer's discretion as to whether they agree to the volunteer, because you might have volunteers that come forward who either have essential skills that you don't want to lose, or are the most expensive to make redundant, and your business can't afford to make those redundancies. So just because you ask for them doesn't necessarily mean you're going to agree to them. You can look at retraining staff, and so they can work in other areas of the business. And this might be because the business has changed, and actually you need to think about actually the job that they do now, or the job that we've got in the businesses, those jobs aren't really needed now going forward. We're in a different world now, and actually I don't need the job done like that, or I don't need the job at all. But I do need the job done in this way, because, and this could be automating a job or using a different system or a different process. And it might be that actually you want to retrain staff to work in the new job or in different areas instead of making redundancies. So that's a great way of doing it as well. If you're a big enough business, you can redeploy employees into other areas of the business to fill other vacancies. So if you've got vacancies and you've got to make redundancies, trying to fill from within rather than bringing external people in. You can use other periods of absence, such as sabbaticals, paid leave, unpaid leave. There's lots of different ways that you can use absences. I've got a client who's currently using quite a bit of unpaid leave in consultation with their staff and with agreements. And it's very important that if you're going to use sabbaticals or unpaid leave, that when you discuss it, you discuss all the terms of it and you get it all very clearly written down so that everybody absolutely clearly understands. And examples of that might be, is the employment going to continue? Sometimes with sabbaticals, there might be an agreement that you're allowed to go on a sabbatical for a year, and when you'll want to come back, we will see if we've got a job for you, and if we haven't, unfortunately, then you can't return. Unpaid leave is usually a shorter period of time, and we tend to say you come back to your job, and agreeing things like, will annual leave be accrued during that time as well? And if it is, put something in place which means they continuously take that leave, so they're not accruing it and coming back with huge amounts of leave. So if you're going to agree to other periods of absence, make sure you agree it up front, you put it in writing so both parties are very clear on what the agreement is. Don't renew the contracts of agency workers and temps. So that obviously goes without saying. What you're trying to do is you're trying to protect your staff. So anybody that's not technically your members of staff, people that you bring in from external to do jobs, unless it's an absolute essential job that nobody in your business can do, then I would be suggesting that you don't renew their contracts, but look within the company. So those are some of the alternatives to redundancy that you could consider. Right, so I mentioned earlier about short time and layoffs. So we'll just come and have a quick look at that before I have to end. Short time working is where you say to staff, I can't bring you in on the number of hours. I haven't got the work for the number of hours that you do, but I have some work for you. And it's usually that it's 50%, the limit is 50% of their time. So they can do some work, the rest of the work, they will go home without any pay. There has to be, or there should be, a clause in the contract, which means that you can use that. So in the contract, there'll be a clause, we call it the lost clause, which is layoff and short time working. If you have that clause in the contract, and it's a clause which was very popular in the 70s and 80s when we saw a lot of industrial action, less popular now, but as you can imagine, it's coming back into fashion. If you have that clause, then you can invoke it. If you don't have that clause, then you have to consult with your staff and get consent. Short time and layoff was something which employers had to use before the government introduced the furlough scheme. So where we had that period of time where we could see businesses struggling, but there was no furlough scheme, a lot of businesses had to rely on either layoff or short time working. Now we're lucky at the moment, we've had furlough, we've got the job support scheme, which will protect a lot of jobs, but there may be a time when, after April, when all these schemes stop and businesses still can't find enough work or pay employees. And we may be back at that point to having to use short time or layoff. So I was just raising it with you now so that you know of its existence and you know that that can be used, but you must check your contracts first. And the other one is what's called layoff. And this is where, in effect, it's like the furlough scheme, but without the furlough grant. It's where you say to staff, I'm sorry, but I've got no work for you to do. And they go home. And they go home on no pay. Again, you must have the contractual consent or staff agreement, one of the two. So if you've got it in the contract that allows you to do it, you can invoke it. If you haven't, you must get the consent of your staff. Their employment continues throughout, as it does in short time working. So they do continue to accrue leave throughout that time. Now, as I said, we go home on no pay. There are some things they can claim. They can claim what's called a statutory guarantee payment, which is claimed, and it's a payment that is set by the government, and it's at £30 a day, and you can pay that up to 5 days, so £130 and £150 in total. That is for complete workless days, because there may be days during the layoff period where you say, I'm sorry, I haven't got any work for you today. I have got some work tomorrow, but I haven't got any work on Wednesday. And in that case, they would only get the guarantee payment for the complete workless days. And for the work days, you would pay them. They can also claim universal credit while they're on it. And they can also, while they're laid off, they can also seek employment elsewhere. So for example, we did see at the beginning of the whole pandemic, we saw a lot of people taking and through furlough kind of fruit picking jobs and things like that while the weather was nice. And they can do that during layoff, but you must be very clear that if they're laid off, the minute you need them back in, you can ask them for them to come back into work. So whatever job they get, whether it's a fruit picking job or it's shelf working at a supermarket, they need to be able to kind of stop that job and come straight back to you when you need them back. Now, they can claim redundancy payment from you if you have them on layoff for 4 consecutive weeks, or you have them on layoff for 6 weeks in a 13-week period. And if you do that, they can say to you, I actually now want you to make me redundant. You either have to do one of two things in that situation. You either have to make them redundant and pay them if they are subject to redundancy payments, or you have to counter respond by bringing them back into work and paying them to work. So one of those two things. Again, hopefully you might not have to use that while we've got the job support scheme in place, but there may be a time when you have to consider it. Or you may have to use it because you can't use the job support scheme because you don't have the 33% of the hours that you can give staff. So it's just, again, something for you to be aware of. And I think that, oh no, if I can quickly, if I've got time, Peter, to quickly talk about flexible and home working. Again, it's not a grant, so it doesn't technically come under a government support, but I just wanted to raise this with you because it is becoming very common. A lot of people are now working from home remotely and have been doing so since, since March, and are still, for those that can't work, can't go into the office, don't need to go into the office, they can work from home. Pre the 24th of September, the government was very much about trying to get people back into the workplace. Now, of course, they've reversed that advice, and they're now saying where possible, people should continue to work from home. Obviously, the situations where that's not possible, but where they are, they should now continue to be working from home. Where you do have to bring people into the workplace, maybe you can consider things like only having a percentage, like 10%, for example, of your workforce back in the workplace, and maybe they only come back in to do certain tasks. Maybe it's tasks they can't do from home, maybe it's a project they can't work on or something they need to do in the workplace, and therefore they only come in to do that. If they do come in, you must ensure, obviously, that it's a safe environment, and I know Peter's going to cover all this, so I'm not going to talk about that. But the home is still going to be a place of work, so you still have that responsibility to make sure that they're working safely at home and the environment is safe as well. And that includes, obviously, making sure that they are taking breaks as well. Some of the positives about working from home is that the lot of workers are saying they're happier at home, they feel more productive at home, they have less interruptions. This is what the employees are saying. The employers may not necessarily agree with that. Obviously, there's a lot less commute, so possibly they have more time to work, which makes them more productive because they're not having to sit in traffic or on a train for an hour, so a lot more time for them. And for employers, obviously, there's less people in the office. They may need smaller premises going forward because they don't have the amount of people that they actually don't need as bigger office because there's not going to be as many people working in the office. And I think we may see some employers choosing to do this going forward permanently. There are some challenges, obviously, to working, flexible working or home working, which are communication. Employers are going to have to make sure that they are regularly and effectively communicating with staff, whether that's one-to-one or whether that's having team meetings. And we're all now very much used to using Zoom and Teams and other platforms for having these meetings, but really making sure that you're having very clear communication with your staff, making sure you're not staff that are disengaged, they're kind of switching off slightly, not as productive as they could be, and really trying to deal with that really promptly and finding out why that is happening. Dealing with staff that feel very isolated at home. Some people enjoy coming into the office. I've actually got clients whose staff are saying that they actually are missing the workplace. They want to come back in because maybe the workplace is the only time they interact with other people, or they enjoy those water cooler conversations, asking how people are, having conversations and catching up, and then they're missing that interaction. So just be very aware of people who are isolated. And I think going in line with that is not everybody's home is a happy place. So just be aware of any employees that are really struggling at home or are subject to anything that's going on at home that they can't then get out of because they're not coming to work. Employers may be saying that staff are less productive. We were forced into this situation in March. We had no choice but for many people to work at home, and employers have had to put up with it because that's where we've had to work. But many employers will say, we had to put up with it since March because that's what we had to do. But actually, staff weren't as productive as they usually are. The job that they did, okay, they did it from home, but they didn't do the full job. They didn't cover the full tasks. So that might just be something to look at again. And there are actually more distractions, aren't there, when you're working at home? There's this distraction of the kitchen or the TV or other things that are going on at home as well, that staff don't have those distractions when they're in the workplace. So it's going to be, and the other thing I think is the distinction between homework and home and work. When people are working at home, they might be setting out their books or their everything, or their files and their paperwork across the dining room table. And then on Friday, they'll pack all that away. But even over the weekend, you know, they're still looking at that dining room table thinking that's my place of work. Or where they're not actually switching off and actually going home at 5 o'clock because they're already at home. So actually they're just carrying on working because the boundary between home and work time is getting a bit blurred. So just make sure that that's very clear with your staff about that. And I think going forward, it's going to be looking at, you know, can that work be done at home as effectively as it is in the office? And we're not talking about a time where we had to do it. We're now possibly looking at a time where we have a choice, because hopefully in the future there will be that time where we have a choice. And we're saying, actually, can that job be done effectively at home, as effectively as it would be done in the office? And those will be some questions for you to look at as well. And that's it. I think that's it for me, Peter. That's all my parts covered.
Thank you very much, Claire, there. Certainly I'm going to say the working from home is something which is evolving a little bit. And I think as people get more used to it, you know, their productivity will increase, and just get things like the equipment in. I mean, at the moment, I've got a home office being built simply because there's now 2 of us working in the area. We were working from home before, and we need the extra space. I have got a question come in, and it's about tax relief. So let me just bring that up. And it's just the employee can claim tax relief at £26 per month.
Yes, I believe that is not, unfortunately, that's not my area of business, but I do understand that they can claim that. Yes.
There is a sliding scale for employees working from home in terms of the number of hours that they work, but £26 a month is for is I'm going to say, I think, the maximum, if I remember right, without looking.
I think it was £6 a week, something like that, on that sliding scale. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so employees can claim that going forward. I think that's all the questions we've got. We'll look again at questions a bit later on. So if you do have any questions, please do put them in the questions function, and we'll come back and have a look at those towards the end. I'm going to now talk a little bit more about the restrictions in place, and some of the changes for the restrictions going forward, and what we can do looking at that going forward. So let me just change a few things around. I've started off with just a couple of photos. These are really there just to really just show a few things of a few ways people have come up with innovative ideas about how to protect people going forward. I'm going to say, I'm not necessarily going to say the pool noodles. I think this is somewhere in Germany actually who use this one, but I just really like the pictures and show that there are ways that people have thought outside the box of going down the COVID secure route. Now, this probably won't suit every business going forward, but it is a case of just thinking about things going forward. So what am I going to talk about here? I'm going to mention 2 or 3 things. First of all, I want to talk about social distancing. I know that's been banged on about since March. I know it's something that everybody should know about, but I think this underpins the whole raft of restrictions that are coming in place. And I think it's important to mention this really to set the scene of the restrictions that are going forward. So what is social distancing? Well, it is to have a distance between people, and we've got to talk about what COVID is at this point. So COVID-19 is I always struggle with that word, respiratory in its nature. So most of the transfer of this is done from people speaking, and I'm going to say droplets coming out of the mouth while people are speaking, shouting, singing, all those sort of things, or just general breathing for that matter. The further you are away from somebody, the less likelihood of that being transferred to you are. So therefore we have this 2 metre rule, and the 2 metre rule has been relaxed in certain settings. But the reason for this is it's very, very straightforward. The further you are away from somebody, the less likely it is for that person to contract anything from yourself. So we do need to maintain this social distancing, and I think this is one of the most important things. I think this also shows why some of the rules and regulations have come about, and also underpins some of this going forward. So I think it's very important to mention that at this point. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one because, as I say, it's been around since March. Hopefully everybody's had this well and truly drummed into them, but we do need to maintain vigilance on this, especially in business settings. So if you've got shops, if you've got offices and things like that, you do still need to maintain that social distancing rule. And that is the underpinning, the first thing we need to look at going forward. So there, just a little bit of information on the reasons for social distancing and why we need it. The final one I've put on there, I think, is one of the most important things here, because we're looking for that reassurance. We need people to feel safe and be reassured that it is safe to work, shop or spend. And certainly I'm somebody now who goes into a place, especially some of the supermarkets, and go, oh, there's a lot of people around here. I don't feel comfortable. And I think a lot of people are moving into that. They don't feel comfortable. And if they don't feel comfortable, they will not come into your premises. So again, if you've got a shop or even an office or anything like that, and we're talking about employees at this point as well, they do not feel safe. And one of the main reasons for this is this too many people too close to you, then they will not come in. And this will affect absentee rate. It will affect how many customers you have. So it is something you do need to be aware of. Okay, so let's start off with some of the rules and regulations, and these are fast changing. There has been some updates even in the last 24 hours on the 3-tier system. So fairly recently, the government moved into this 3-tier system, and this is their alert system going forward in terms of what restrictions there are. Currently, I believe all of the Humber region is in Tier 1. With some areas have a slightly higher rate, and so Tier 2 may well be on the cards, depending on what happens going forward. I think most places in the country are somewhere between this Tier 1 and Tier 2, and certainly there is the risk that Tier 2 might come into force. So I want to look at what the differences are, what they actually mean. Well, the 3 tiers are basically set out into medium, high, and very high. I've been asked the question, what happened to sort of the low, and I'm going to say I don't know for that one. We just have medium, high, and very high. I think there is a key point here again, why they've said medium, high, and very high, because I think low would give that complacency to people that everything is okay and it is a low risk. Risk hasn't changed. Risk has gone up in all areas across the country, and therefore I think that's why they've used the terms medium, high, and very high to more concentrate people's minds. We are looking at some of this from a marketing point of view, and it is a marketing exercise, I'm going to say, by the government to say, look, you do still need to be careful in Tier 1 because it is not a low risk, it is a medium risk, and you still need to be careful and follow the guidance. Whereas then we move up to a high and a let's get worried, you're in very high, we need to do something about it. So what are the rules? What are the various rules? Well, I'm going to move on very quickly to this one and talk at the medium section. So these are the rules that have been in place for quite a while, and there's no real change to these rules. First of all, the rule of 6. Now we've all kind of spoken about the rule of 6. We've all heard about the rule of 6, and again, I think this one is slightly to do with enforcement. It's there to make sure that people can really understand what they need to do. It's a simple rule. People can only meet in groups of 6 people. So police, restaurant owners, cafe owners, Generally, any shop owner can look around and say, is there more than 6 people in that group? If the answer is yes, they can't do it. Again, from your point of view, as a member of the general public, again, you can say, is there more than 6 of us? Yes, I'm not allowed to do it. It's a simple yes and no, black and white answer. So that's what the rule of 6 is. This applies to all people indoors and outdoors in tier 1. So in a shop, restaurant, anything like that, the rule of 6 applies. So maximum, I'm going to say table size would be 6 people inside or outside. Inside or outside. There are a few exemptions to this rule of 6. The first of one, and the most obvious, is during unavoidable work duties. Now, if you've been on any of my previous workshops, we've spoken a lot about risk assessments. We spoke a lot about reducing down the risk. So reducing down the risk obviously means looking again back at that social distancing and making sure people don't meet with larger groups. They don't work in larger groups. So if you can split up work parties to the smallest possible denominator, that is what we need to do. Sometimes, unfortunately, it is unavoidable. One of the obvious ones I'm going to talk about here is production lines. Production lines, you may be able to put things in place. And if you saw some of the photos I put on earlier about what you can do in terms of screens and stuff like that, that's really great. But you may have those larger groups during in your workplace. If it is unavoidable, if there isn't something you can put in place to reduce the measures, to reduce the infection measures down, you are allowed to work in or have larger groups for work duties. The rule of 6 does not apply, but you really should be looking at reducing that down, and it should be only if it's unavoidable. The second one, I'm going to say providing emergency assistance. Hopefully that one is not going to come into anybody's lives going forward, but again, I think it's an important one to mention, and also to fulfill legal obligations. So this would be things like courts and police activities would come into this category. There are a number of other exemptions at this point, and if anybody wants to have a look at those, do go onto the .gov.uk website, and there is a full list of what the exemptions are. I've tried to pick out the main ones there, which people will come across. In terms of pubs and restaurants is the next one, and I think this is one of the ones which is probably one of the more controversial rules going forward. But pubs and restaurants must close at 10 p.m. So all pubs and restaurants must close at 10 p.m. And that's a nice, again, straightforward blanket rule. I think we must make sure that we are understanding that some of these rules are made there to be just nice and clear. And I think this is another example of that one. Yes, I've seen all the bits on Facebook and various social media things saying what happens after 10 p.m. Does the virus become a lot more virulent and things like that? Well, it is more a case of, right, let's put something in place. Let's try and make it nice and simple so people can understand it. So pubs, restaurants must close at 10 p.m. Takeaways can operate after this on a delivery and click and collect basis. So takeaways are allowed to be open after 10 p.m. But it's for click and collect or deliveries. The other one I'm going to mention here is food and drink. So it all must be table service, and face coverings must be worn when entering, exiting the premises, and also moving about the premises. So going to toilets and things like that. They can be removed at the table, but that is the only place that they can be removed. It is the business's responsibility to enforce this, and there are fines for the businesses who do not enforce this going forward. So do look and take this seriously. I will talk about face coverings and what face coverings are, as well as some of the rules about selling them. and I'll also talk about the interesting one with face visors, and are they face coverings, are they legal, and are they covered? The final bit of advice, again, coming back to the risk assessment, coming back to what happens if, is this work, can you work from home? Is it possible to work from home? And if you get somebody working from home, then the reduced risk is massive. And it basically takes out most of the risks that you've got in terms of the COVID side of things. So work from home if possible. And a bit like Claire was saying, there's been I'm going to say differing accounts in terms of, has people's productivity gone up? Has it gone down? And I think what you've got to look at here is, earlier on, like I said, there has been a lot of changes. People were having to homeschool kids. They were suddenly thrust into working from home when they'd never done it before. The technology wasn't necessarily there or in place for them, and that's evolved. People have got more used to it. So I am going to say, even if you've seen a reduction in your productivity of your staff from working from home, don't discount it straight away. Look at the reasons why that is and see whether you can put things in place to increase that productivity up. And it might be, we'll get some new laptops for people. It might be we'll invest in better broadband for them, or give them something towards their broadband costs so they can have better broadband. Or it might be a case of, oh, they're working from home with kids, and it's a difficult thing to do. That's not the case anymore. Kids have gone back to school, we hope, for most of them. I know some are being isolated and coming back and forth, but for most kids, they are in school now, so that will help increase that productivity going forward. Let's take a look at tier 2. So tier 2 classed as high, and I'm going to say, first of all, the rules are as per medium. So it's a bit like going to buy a car where you've got the specifications and you get all what you had in the previous one with some additionality. The additionality for tier 2 is fairly straightforward, and it's to do with the rule of 6. So businesses can operate as they did at the medium level. However, mixing inside family groups mixing inside, it has to be the rule of 6 does not apply. You cannot mix at all inside. Outside, the rule of 6 still applies. So I'm going to take a restaurant here as an example. A restaurant as an example, outside, the rules are the same as the medium. Groups of 6 can meet up. Inside, it must only be a booking for the family. So it's only a family group inside. There is no meeting up for people, nothing like that. It has to be just that one, I say bubble, that one family that can meet inside. Outside, not a problem, that continues as normal, but inside is the change. Here for businesses, I think the biggest change we're going to see is the fact that we're moving into the winter, and therefore outside seating is getting less and less useful with the weather getting colder and things like that. Now, one of the things I'm going to say here is look at your business continuity. If you're one of the businesses that rely on people coming in, I'm going to say pubs, restaurants and things like that, you may want to say, well, what can I do to mitigate this risk? What can I do to reduce this down? And one of the things you can do is look at your outside space. Look at what you can do to make that more usable. And I've certainly seen many, many pubs, restaurants and coffee shops investing in more covered space outside. So it is still outside, but it's more covered. Weather is less of an issue, and they can put things like patio heaters and stuff like that in to help make it more appealing to be outside. So do have a look at that now. Get things like that in place so that if, whichever way you look at it, things move from one to the other, you've got that ability there. Not only that, it does increase your covers, and therefore will give you a much better chance of attracting people in. Like I said earlier on, communication is key and making people feel safe. Certainly there are still people who feel more safe outside because the guidance has always been that you are more safe with that fresh air coming through. So they'd rather eat outside, rather sit outside, and if you can make it more pleasant for them, again, they're more likely to come to your premises. The next one I'm going to talk about is very high. Now, hopefully, we're not going to see many of these cases, but this is places like Liverpool, Manchester, and South Yorkshire this morning have been announced to move into the very high sector. Again, the rules as per are as per the high, with the addition of that the group of 6 is now completely removed, and there is no mixing inside or outdoors. No mixing inside or outdoors. So it's only family groups inside and outdoors. Pubs and bars are to close, but restaurants can remain open, but only if they're serving meals, and it has to be classed as a substantial meal. Now, I've seen lots of different things here about what is a substantial meal, and I think the best example I saw was the pasty one. Is a pasty a substantial meal? And the answer to that one seemed to be no. Just a pasty on its own is not a substantial meal, but if it came with chips or salad or something like that, then yes, it would be a substantial meal. I think there's a lot of grey at this point, and the guidance isn't 100% clear here. Most of these sort of guidance things, we usually rely on what's called case law. Case law is where somebody has been taken to task over it, and there has been a court case usually, and a judge has made a decision of yes or no. That sets a precedent of whether something is or isn't able to go ahead. And I think when we're looking at what a substantial meal is, that is what we're going to have to rely on. The problem is we haven't had or have the time for this to take place. So I think you need to look at this from a pragmatic point of view. I would say that a substantial meal is served on a plate with a knife and fork. That's my personal view of what a substantial meal is. But as I say, I think there's a lot of grey there, and a lot of clarification that will come out in the next few weeks and days. Alcohol can only be served as part of that meal. So they must be buying a meal at the same time, and it must be served as part of that meal. Okay. So restaurants can remain open. Travel into or out of the high area should be avoided, as for people staying away who are from inside the area, or people staying within that area from outside. So if your business relies on travel, you do need to be very careful with these very high areas. Equally, this kind of relies on the highs and mediums as well, and we should be looking at restricting travel the best we can as a business ourselves. So again, if you've got a business which relies on people traveling, you do have a look at those processes. What can be done to avoid that travel? Zoom, GoTo, all of the Teams, all of these sort of practices, people are getting a lot more used to it. It's saving businesses a lot of money. Expenses, petrol, those sort of things. So utilize them. People feel a lot more happy with them. Efficiency can be great, but you're not spending those hours on the road. So do have a look at how you can utilize these going forward. Yes, it will not 100% ever replace face-to-face, in my opinion. But even if it reduces a percentage of it, again, we're looking at reducing that risk, reducing your costs, which goes some way to have a look at the costs that you may have come across because of implementing some of these rules and regulations. From what we've seen so far, each area is given 2 or 3 days notice to move from one tier to the next. So it isn't a vast amount of notice. And this is why I'm going to say have a look at all 3 tiers and see how it will affect your business if you move into it, and how you can mitigate those issues, such as providing outdoor seating and things like that, so that you're not having to rush to make these changes. Make sure you're fully aware of the programs that are available and the support schemes so that you can take advantage of these if you have to. You need to be aware of what may happen. Hopefully, we'll not move into tier 3. Hopefully, we'll not move into tier 2. But I feel that, unfortunately, at some point this winter, most areas may well see some tier 2 activity. One of the questions I get asked is, how do we know when people move from tier 1 to tier 2 and to tier 3? And certainly there's a bit of confusion in that. One of the ones that I saw is why Nottingham is one of the highest rates, higher than Yorkshire, higher than Manchester, but isn't being moved into tier 3 yet. Why is that? Well, one of the things here is we're not privy to all the data. Certainly some of the data is based upon infection rates. But it's also, I think, they look at some of the data in terms of who's being infected and how they're being infected. They've confirmed that this is some of the data that they're looking at. And Nottingham is a really good example on this one, because Nottingham has a very high infection rate, but a lot of this is to do with students who are in a controlled environment, I think was the wording that the government used. And therefore, the infection rate in the general public was actually not as high as it might suggest. Certainly, I've seen local farms that have had very high infection rates because a group of farm pickers got COVID, and therefore suddenly there was 100 different cases. But it is a controlled environment. So things like that are what they're looking at. This doesn't help you as a business, because how do you know when we're moving from one to another, or the point at which it's going to be moved? You may well move in. So predicting this is not going to be something you're going to be able to do. You do need to keep an eye on things like infection rates, and they will give an idea of if we're getting close to moving from one tier to the next. But realistically, I don't think as a business you're going to know or be able to predict this with any certainty. And again, for this reason, you need to be able to pivot this. You need to have that continuity plan in place to be able to do this and move from one to the other very, very quickly. Finally, in terms of sort of lockdowns, we've seen that from this weekend, Wales is going to go into a circuit breaker lockdown. And that's a bit like we saw back in March when everything closes. That's going to be for 2 or 3 weeks. Everything's going to close in the hope to actually make a stop, a fire break in terms of the spread and reduction in the spread. Will it work? Don't know. Who knows? Will this happen in the UK, or will this happen in England and other areas of the UK? Don't know. It is, I'm afraid, a possibility. It is something that has been discussed. Will it happen? Is it the right thing to do? I don't know. But what I soon say here, again, you need to think about it. Think about what happens if. How are we going to do it? Get things in place so that you can continue the best you can. Now, this might be a case of making sure you can switch to home working very, very quickly for all staff. So make sure they're taking their laptops home, make sure those are up to date, items like that. But just have a think about what happens if this takes place. It is something you need to be wary of. I'm now going to talk, I want to talk about masks. I think masks are something which has come up many a time going forward, and look at some of the rules and regulations on masks. There have been some updates on some of the rules and regulations of masks, and I think these have been updates and more clarification as we're getting more used to the mask situation. So let's just talk about masks and face coverings. We now have, I'm going to say, a couple of definitions for face coverings. One is legal, and the other one, which I've put up, is in the recommended guidance. So let's just mention what legalities and recommended guidance and the difference between the two. The government issue a number of legal rules and regulations. These are law. These have to be followed, and they are a strict definition. Okay, they have been passed through and have been put as law. Guidance, however, is not necessarily law, but does set a precedent, and it's what things like the courts, in terms of these grey areas, may use to say this is right and this is wrong. Okay, it is a precedent rather than a definitive law. So, face coverings, what is the law saying? Well, the law now has a definition of a face covering, and a face covering means any covering of any type which covers the person's nose and mouth. So it must cover the nose and mouth. And I know this has been mentioned many a time. You need to make sure that anybody who has to wear a face covering is wearing it correctly, and that is covering the nose as well as the mouth. I've seen this advertised so many times. I've seen it mentioned so many times, but I'm amazed at the number of people I see walking around shops with what is basically, I'm going to say, just covering the mouth, a bit like a gag rather than the nose as well. It is the business's responsibility to enforce the wearing of face coverings within the shops, within office premises where necessary. So you do need to make sure that you enforce that going forward. Let's mention about visors. Are visors face coverings? Well, we need to start looking at the guidance at this point to discuss whether visors are face coverings. And in English guidance, Scottish guidance goes actually a little bit further and is a little bit clearer, but in English guidance, it says that face coverings must securely fit to the side of the face. If this is the case, if we look at a visor as a face covering, it doesn't fit securely to the side of the face. Therefore, a visor is not a face covering. Therefore, it is not a face covering. So, if you are required to wear a face covering, so this is anybody going into shops and staff as well, visors do not meet the English guidance for that. They do not meet the English guidance. Not to say they can't be worn. They can be worn as additional protection. So you can wear a face covering, as in a mask, and a visor as well. That is perfectly okay. And you may well want to do that, but a visor does not count as a face covering according to the guidance. Okay, according to the guidance. So where must face coverings be worn? Well, I'm going to say we all know about the shops. We all know as a customer that in any indoor setting, as a customer, you must wear a face covering. That is nice and straightforward. Remember, visors do not count because the guidance says that it must fit securely. In terms of staff as well, face coverings must be worn by retail, leisure and hospitality staff working in areas that are open to the public and where you are likely to come into contact with the member public. So if you are in any business setting where you are likely to come into contact with a member of the public, you must wear a face covering. You must wear a face covering. There are a few exceptions to this. And the exception basically is if businesses have taken steps to create a physical barrier, so this is the perspex shields and things like that, then the person behind the barrier will not be required to wear a face covering. Again, they may well want to, and it may look good from you as a business point of view, that again, it's making people feel safe, making them want to come into your business. So you may take the thing that I'm going to ask my staff to wear a face covering behind the screens as well. So this is like tills and things like that, but they do not have to. They do not have to. It is not a requirement for them to do that, provided there is a physical barrier in place. We do need to look at the barriers. We do need to make sure that they are adequate. So if you've got a little 3-inch Perspex screen, that's not going to be adequate. It does need to be an adequate barrier to stop that transfer of, I'm going to say, droplets from breathing, speaking, talking, screaming, shouting, however your business might be, to the person on the other side. So do make sure that it is an adequate barrier. Finally, I want to talk about some of the masks which you can and can't wear. What are the rules and regulations here? So they can be homemade. That is not an issue. They are perfectly okay to be homemade. They are not PPE. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. They are classed as a face covering. A few which I've seen, I still see loads of, again, a bit like people wearing face masks just around their mouth and not their nose. We still see KN95, KF94 and N95 masks around. These are not suitable and do not comply with UK regulation, and therefore should not be sold or used in any case. The only exception to this is if they're dual registered with the CE mark as well, which shows they pass both levels of certification, then that is okay. But if they're KN95, KF94, N95, they should not be used. They should not be used. Now, a lot of people say, well, hang on, how can you make your own and these not be able to be used? Well, what we're saying is here is these may not have passed any sort of UK regulations, and therefore they may not be up to standard as safe practices. So they may be made of material that is not safe for the wearer, possibly. I don't think that is the case in most instances, but that's the argument and why they are not able to be used. Let's talk about, actually, I'm going to talk about PPE very, very quickly now. In fact, let's go back a slide and just before we go into buying and selling. In terms of face coverings, they are not PPE. They are not PPE. And I see it so many times that they are referred to as PPE. They're not. PPE is personal protective equipment. So it's there to protect the wearer. Yeah, steel toe cap boots, they're PPE. You drop something on your foot, it's there to protect your foot. Goggles are PPE. They are there to protect you. And I say visors are PPE because they're there to protect you. Anything which is PPE, personal protective equipment, must be registered and must be marked in accordance. So they must have that CE mark to show that they've been tested and they will protect. They will protect. Face coverings, though, we know you can make at home. So they are not PPE and they are not there to protect the wearer. Like we said, it's a respiratory disease and it's transferred by droplets, and the idea being is droplets are less easy to leave the close proximity of your mouth, your nose, and therefore a spread a shorter distance. That's the reason for a face covering. And so they are not PPE. They are, in a business setting, would be classed more as uniform and are no different to wearing a branded t-shirt. Okay, here again, think about them as uniform. This is the customer facing part of your business. Make them look smart. Make them look like they comply. Again, making people feel safe. Okay, but do not describe them as PPE. I wanted to mention that before we went on to this slide and looked at the buying and selling of them. So this is if you're buying for yourself, buying for your work, or selling as part of your work. As I've seen, loads and loads of shops have started selling face coverings. First of all, they should not be described as PPE because, as I said, they are not. Unless they are protecting the user, they are not PPE. If they are, they must conform to PPE regulations, be CE marked, and you must have that certification. Like I said before, and the KN95, KF94s, N95s are not suitable and should not be sold. So if you've got some of those and you're selling them in a shop, or you're looking at, you see a shop buying them, selling them, do not buy them. Yeah, they do not comply. Do make sure the selling description is correct. Okay. When I say that, again, I've seen lots of people say, and I've seen Facebook posts and stuff like that, saying, "Oh, we've had a new lot of PPE come in. Come and buy your face mask here." I'm not going to say anymore. I'm not going to say any more of that one. Equally, I've seen ones where they say they can protect you against this. They can protect you against this, that. These are 3-layer systems to help protect against viruses. It is not a problem to say they're 3-layer. It is not a problem because that is what's recommended, certainly by the WHO. I'm not talking about the band in that one, but any viral claims must be substantiated. So if you're saying it can protect, it must be substantiated. And in actual fact, if you mention anything about how it can protect you or others, then that becomes a medical device and therefore would have to conform to the appropriate medical regulations. Okay, so be careful how you describe it if you're selling it. Be careful how it's described when you're buying it, that it is a face covering and it is there to comply with the law, not necessarily as a antiviral or anything like that. Final thing here is about what is safe and this homemade style of things. It is not a problem to be homemade, as long as it's not described as having any antiviral claims or anything like that, or as long as it's not described as PPE, it can be homemade. And I've seen lots of places, lots of people knocking really good masks up in their, I'm going to say, garden shed, on the Singer sewing machine or whatever, and looking at that, and they are really good. They are compliant. There's no problems with them, and actually probably one of the best ones I've seen. Personally, I think they're a lot better than the throwaway blue medical ones. I don't like seeing those, simply because they're disposable. They have to be disposed of after each use. And I see so many of them, I'm afraid, blowing around in the litter. I'm afraid they really, I just really don't like them from that point of view. I don't think they set a good example. Again, if you're a business, I don't like seeing business with staff wearing those, because the amount they must go through, that every time they take them off, they have to be replaced. That's at least every day they have to be replaced. The cost for a start is massive, and the waste is massive. And to be honest, I don't want to be dealing with businesses who don't respect the environment, and I'm sure there's lots of people out there. So I'd much rather see the homemade ones going forward. They do still have to be safe. So what that means is they have to adhere to general product safety. It's not a spelling mistake, but I'll correct that. So they do need to make sure general product safety is thought about. So it's thinking about things like, let's say, choking hazards, Okay, so mask, you probably make sure it wouldn't choke, but things like the straps and stuff like that, just think about how they're made. Realistically, for masks, they're straightforward. They're not particularly difficult, and there isn't a massive amount you need to think about here. But as long as they comply with that general public product safety, then there is no issues. It's more to do with the descriptions, to be honest, in terms of how they're sold and whether you should buy them. Actually, one thing which I haven't mentioned is if you are buying PPE, do make sure that you get the certificates to say that they are safe to use, and do make sure that they are in English, because they need to be read by and understood by yourself, who is the purchaser of any PPE. I'm going to talk very quickly and briefly about track and trace. Again, track and trace has been in for a while, but I want to mention about the ways we take the information. I'll say at this point, I've put a lot of information in the next couple of slides about track and trace. They are downloadable. There's a handout in today's section. You can download this along with a load of links. And I try to just put this in for information point of view. I think most people, again, are fairly happy with track and trace, but I do want to mention 2 or 3 things. First of all, I want to mention the government's app. It is good practice for all businesses, and I'm going to say all businesses regardless at this point, to have access to the app. It makes life a lot easier from you as a business to adhere to track and trace, because for anybody visiting your premises, you need to take their details down. This includes staff and people who work at the premises, as well as visitors. I'm going to say the obvious one is restaurants at this point. So do make sure you take those details. The government's app allows you to do that very straightforward with a QR code. And I'm going to say most people, I think in the first 24 hours, 2.2 million people downloaded the app. So most people do have access to that. It is very easy to use. Put the QR codes in the door, on the tables, things like that. And people just scan those, job done. You don't have to worry about anything more. You can get on with actually running your business. You do need to have a secondary measure in place, because unfortunately that app doesn't work on all phones. Some people don't have smartphones and things like that. So you do need to make sure you have a secondary system in place. And I'm going to mention 2 systems here because these are the 2 best systems that I've come across. One of the best system that I've seen, although it doesn't capture everybody, is a straightforward text message where you text your name and number, or your number will be there, to a certain number. That is usually a phone which is usually locked in some cabinet somewhere, and it registers your time, it registers the number and your contact details and your name, which is what you need to take. A nice, straightforward, easy way of doing it. A nice, easy way of complying with GDPR, because that phone can be locked away in a drawer or something like that. So access to that is restricted. That data can be kept for 21 days and just deleted off. Nice and straightforward. Very easy way of doing it. Paper is the next one. Again, you take the same details, but this must be held securely. Please do not leave a list out on the desk on a bar or something like that, or a table. Please don't do that, because that is a breach of GDPR. This will stop people from coming into your business. I know many people who have said, I'm not going in there because I'm not leaving my details. So please make sure that you keep things secure and adhere to GDPR. GDPR is in the same way. Records must be kept for 21 days, which is basically the incubation period for COVID-19. After that, they must be destroyed. People can opt out of it. The other thing to mention here is, please, again, do not use any of this data for marketing. This is for track and trace. You can ask them if you want to be in marketing as well and things like that. That's as a separate issue. But please, this data must be kept for track and trace only and cannot be used for marketing. Okay, it cannot be used for marketing. There are as well some unscrupulous people who are using this not only for marketing but also to find out people's details for identity thefts and things like that. I have put on a little bit of detail here about if you are contacted by contact tracers, what you'll need to know. They will call you from a specific number or send you a text from a certain text number, name, whatever it is. I'm kind of trying to think what to call that then, but it will be NHS tracing as the text message. They will ask you to sign in to the NHS Test and Trace website, and please do double check all of this because we need to keep people's data safe. And as I say, there are some unscrupulous people taking advantage of this one. They will not ask you very much details. They will not ask you to phone a premium rate number, or there is no payments or anything like that which they will ever ask you for. Bank accounts or social media identities here. It is the same as any other sort of con that they'll be doing. They'll be trying to get more and more information from you. They will only ask you what I put on the previous slide. They will not ask for any of this information. So just be very, very careful at this point. Finally, communication. Make sure you communicate what you're doing to all. One of the easiest ways of making people compliant is by making it clear what they need to do. And like I said before, a lot of this is marketing, making it easy for people. If they understand what they've got to do easily, then they'll do it. It's not a problem at all. They will do it. It's a bit of nudge theory. So put that hand sanitizer on the door so that people automatically have to walk past it. They'll automatically use it. Put that sign up, that contact tracing app, while people are waiting to be seated. They will use it. Make it easy for people and they will use it. I've seen a lot about how do I make people do X, Y, or Z and adhere to these rules. Make it easy for them. Make them sure that that's what they have to do. Make it nice and clear. People do as they're told in general, and that will stop most people from not adhering to these rules. Social media is a great way of enforcing this going forward. Finally, I'll put a bit of further information. I know it's really small. It is in the handout, but I'll put links to some of the government guidance, some of the legislation, also to things like the OPSS in terms of their rules and regulations in terms of face coverings. There is also a link to ARCO's website. They've got a really good coronavirus advice section, again about masks, and that it also has a risk assessment that you can download and use and gives you some pointers to that. Some really good further information. Do download that from the handouts section. I think that's the main part of today, and I do want to now just open up to any questions, if anybody's got any questions going forward. And Claire, if you're around, just waiting to see, because there's a little bit of a delay on any questions. While we're waiting to see if there's any questions come in, I'm just going to mention finally, do have a look at some of the other workshops we've got coming up. Have a look at some of the ones, especially the one which I'm going to mention is sort of future-proofing your business, and putting in contingency plans. Like we said before, we don't know what's going to happen going forward. We can make some good guesses. We know what the tier systems are and things like that, but we need to think about what we're going to do and put things in place before it happens so that we can make those changes in good time, and we're not rushing around the day before we move from one tier to the next of how do we cope with this. It doesn't look like we've got any further questions come in today. And I read a couple of questions earlier on. So it just leaves me really to thank you very much, Claire, for your part today, and the information there. As I say, it's a change in landscape really with with the support, and very difficult to keep on top of. So thank you very much for that detailed information. And to say thank everybody for attending today's session. Thank you very much.